Over the last 4 weeks, we have been talking about different types of messaging elements and how to use them. We've been talking about ads and content and launches and sales and all that good stuff. And hopefully what you've realized if you've listened to all the episodes is we kind of use the same elements over and over again, regardless of the area in which we're using it. How we use them may be different and the phrasings might be different. For example, when I look at problems that I saw for people and I'm looking at it through the lens of content, the problems I use in my content may be different than the problems I use in a sales funnel or sales process. But the thing that is true in all of that is that we have a focus on problems and an understanding of problems. And yes, problems is one of the elements we've been talking about, but you want to use them differently in different parts of your business and launch and funnel and all of that stuff. And so what we wanted to do is to show you how to take all the things we've been talking about over the last 4 weeks and how to put them together and what those elements are, the most important ones, so that you can get started with shifting your messaging, shifting your communication, so you have more effective content, more engagement, you're driving more leads, more sales, all of that stuff. So if that sounds good to you, well, keep on listening.
Hi, I'm Brandon Lucero, and you're about to experience the new way to thrive in business, entrepreneurship, and life by leaning into who you are, what you love, and standing up for what you want to create. Get ready, because this is where we go against the grain, say no to outdated society norms, and we say yes to change in order to create a happier, more fulfilled world. Welcome to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. Today is the 5th and final episode of our series that we've been doing, all about the most powerful messaging elements. And so what we wanted to do is break down some of the major messaging elements that we use in almost everything we do, and then show you how are these being used in real life business of an online business owner, a course creator, a coach, a consultant, a service provider. And so what we've done is we broke it down into 4 different categories, which is content, ads, launches, and sales. And when I say launches, we are talking about evergreen and funnels and all of that stuff as well. However, hopefully what you have realized over the last 4 weeks is there are just a few major messaging elements that have to be dialed in and discovered. Inside of New Generation Mastery, we have 16 different messaging elements that we bring you through. And what I wanted to do in this series is just kind of give you the most important and biggest ones. And what I want you to realize, and hopefully you are realizing this, is a messaging process, figuring out your messaging, figuring out what's going to work, figuring out how to communicate. It actually doesn't come down to just understanding what these elements are. So again, we haven't gone through all of them. We go through all of them inside of our program. However, what I don't want you to do is to tune out of this episode and go like, I wrote them all down, Brandon. I know the elements. And it's like, okay, just because you know the elements doesn't mean you actually know how to use them. It's like saying, okay, cool. I know what to do when I drive a car. I know I need to, put the foot on the brake and turn the ignition on and make sure it's in park. And then I can put the foot on the brake and move it to gas. Like, great. You know what to do, but it doesn't mean you know how to do it. And the secret to messaging actually isn't knowing the elements. I mean, yes, that's step one. It's kind of like awareness, right? Like, let's say you have a bad habit or a trait or something like that, and it makes people not feel great. And you're just unaware that you are doing it. Well, someone can tell you, and now it's within your awareness. If it's not within your awareness, it's impossible to change, right? So having the awareness is great, but then it becomes, okay, well, now that we're aware of this, how do we use it? How do we do it? How do we whatever, right? And there's a process to that because, one of the elements is problems, but just because you know to focus on problems doesn't mean you know what problems are best, which ones are the most effective. It doesn't mean you know that you're communicating or saying it in the right way. So you have to understand, to discover your messaging, it is a process of trial and error, give and take, doing exercises, talking to people, even following certain frameworks that we have on how to say it, how to structure the titles, how to structure a problem, what is a problem, what isn't a problem. Because that's another thing. Sometimes you will mix up problems. And I'm like, that's not really a problem. And they're like, yes, that is a problem because that's what they're doing. And I'm like, that's an action. That's not a problem. To give you an example, someone might say, I could look at my audience and say, the problem is they're doing too much how-to content. I'm like, sorry, but that's not a problem. That's a mistake. That's an action they're doing that doesn't yield the result they want. In my awareness as a coach, as the person who has a solution, I see that as the problem because I'm going like, that is causing the problem. That's the problem. It's like, no, that is the cause of the problem. Because they're doing that, what's being created? It's like, oh, they're posting really great content that took them a long time to learn through experience and education. And it's crickets. It's like, bingo, that's the problem. So what I want you to realize is that just because you have some of the elements doesn't mean you're good to go. We have to go through a process of figuring out how to say it, what to say, all of that stuff. And we do have an event coming up, a 3-day live event that we do one time a year called Master Your Profitable Messaging. This will be the one time I actually pitch something and I'm pitching a free training. And so it's brandonlucero.com/MYPM that you guys can go to. And we're going to dive into that. Okay. We're also going to dive into it on this episode. But if you've been enjoying this series over the last month, you're going to enjoy this teaching, this 3-day training, because we're going to be talking about some things that I haven't talked about yet before. We're going to be going deeper into how to uncover these things. We're also going to be going over what these are, just to give you a reminder, like a refresher. I almost said a breather. That makes no sense. A refresher. And we're going to be going through it. So it's brandonlucero.com/MYPM. Master Your Profitable Messaging. brandonlucero.com/MYPM. Now it's happening on March 18th, 20th, and 22nd on 2024. So I don't know when you're listening to this episode, but hopefully you're listening before then. Okay. So what I want to do in this episode is recap everything we've gone over the last 4 weeks, show you how these all play together. But what I want you to realize is that messaging really comes down to, once you start to figure it out, it becomes really easy. It's one of those things where it's really hard in the beginning, takes some time and effort, and then it gets easier and easier and easier the more you do it because there's less work to do. So once you establish the base of your messaging, any time you change your messaging from there on out, you're changing like 20% of it or 10% of it. You're not trying to go from 0 to 100 like you guys are now. So to go from 0 to 100, it takes some work and trial and error and testing. But once you get to 100 and it's working, your ads are working, things are scaling, things are doing really, really well. Once that starts to happen, once things are going really, really well, and you want to improve on your messaging, it's really just altering the 20% that's not relevant anymore. Maybe you had a problem that wasn't converting, or a problem that's now outdated, or something along those lines. So just keep that in mind, because where I'm at in business is we are always changing our messaging and trying new things, but 80% of my messaging always stays the same. Sometimes it's even 90%. Like, we're heading into this training, this launch. I'm only going to change maybe 5 to 10% of my messaging just to update it and upgrade it with some learnings and findings I've found over the last couple of years. So just know that it may seem like a lot in the beginning, but it gets easier over time, once you establish that sort of foundation. So with that being said, what I want to do is dive into the recap over the last couple of weeks and talk about how everything is working and how it all works together. But I wanted to go through some of the main problems. I wanted you to kind of understand and go okay, I do have a messaging problem. This is a very serious thing. So the top 5 signs that we've seen, and honestly, over the last couple of weeks, if you realize you weren't doing a lot of what we talked about or have a good understanding of what those things are, or even if you do have a good understanding and you're still not seeing the results, your messaging's off. So that's why I wanted to start with hey, just because you guys know the elements doesn't mean your messaging is going to be fixed now. We still have to go through that trial and error. We still have to go through the right process to figure it out. So to know your messaging is off, the number one problem that we usually see, these are going to be our top 5. They're not in any specific order, but the first one is that you're posting consistently, You have really good information that you know can help a lot of people, but your engagement is really low. Like no one's responding to it. Even when you teach in webinars, workshops, challenges, live, whatever, launches, whatever, it never really leads to the sales or the sales you want. So, and you have to have realistic expectations. So let's just say your conversion rate is really, really low. It's not at 2.5% or higher. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is that your launches and funnels either have never taken off or they were doing well, but over the last 12 months, they've either plateaued or declined, even though you are teaching and giving out really good information. In fact, the stuff that like probably was working, if your stuff was working, is seeming like it's not working very much anymore. Like it's just kind of like falling on deaf ears. Number three is it feels like people who understand what you do, people only understand really what it is that you do or how good of a coach you are, or they only understand how good you are after they work with you. So maybe you get someone to work with you for free and they're like, oh my God, that's amazing. Or maybe it's like a low offer, or maybe someone did come in on something. But even though your launch didn't do well, maybe you brought in 2 people and 2 people come in. They're like, oh my God, like I had no idea you were this good. And it just seems like people really don't understand how good you are or that you can help them until after they're already working with you. Number 5 is that you don't get messages from people asking how to work with you. This is the clear sign that your messaging is working. When people are literally reaching out to you asking like, when is your course open? Or how do I work with you? Or, it's on my dream list to work with you one day. Like it doesn't need to happen a lot, but it does need to be happening on some sort of level. So number 1 is that they are asking how to work with you. But number 2, the second part of the 5th problem is that you don't have people repeating your messaging. So when you have really great messaging, people will literally repeat it back to you. You'll have comments like, you're inside my head, or how did you speak to my soul? Or that's exactly what I'm dealing with. So when your messaging is working, you get those sorts of responses. And if you're not getting those responses, then there's something up. There's a disconnect between your knowledge and your skills and your teachings and people understanding why they need it and all that. So basically your relevancy is sort of off. So let's go through those elements. Let's go through the main ones now and on how to fix this, and the main ones we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks. So the first thing we want to focus on is going to be problems. To me, this is like the number one thing, and something I've been really speaking about a lot over the last year or two is understanding the problems. I think so many people focus on here's what I know and here's what I do and here's how I can help. And they actually lose sight of, okay, how does this knowledge, how do these skills actually help someone? Like, what's the issue? What's the problem? And there are some people who just are solving problems that people don't care about. Number 1. Number 2, or they don't care about getting it fixed or solved. Number 1. Number 2, you don't even know the problem that you're solving for people, which makes it impossible to gain their trust in your ability to solve their problem. You guys have to understand, people are joining your courses and your program because there is a problem. There's never not a problem. There's something they want. There's something they don't have. There's something they're struggling with that they think will get fixed or should get fixed or help once they work with you, once they join your program or your community. And there's even people that say like, well, I don't solve problems. I create a community. It's like, yeah, but a lack of community is the problem. There's people that are like, why do they want community? Because there's something going on in their life that causes them to yearn community, to want community. So no matter what you're dealing with, no matter what you're doing, there's always going to be a problem. So when we talk about content, ads, launches, and sales, here's the main reasons why we want to focus on problems for all of it. It's one of the biggest messaging elements. And again, we don't have to talk about problems all the time, right? So, but we need to be aware of what problems we're actually solving for people. And here's what I mean. A lot of people will come to me and they go, Brandon, I don't know the actual transformation that I give. I don't know what benefits do I give? Specifically, what am I doing for people? And my easy answer is just like, what's the opposite of the problems you're solving? And people go like, I don't know the problems. I'm like, well, then that's a problem. Problem inception. So it's easier, in my opinion, it's so much easier to figure out the transformation you give and the problem or the benefits that you give when you understand the problems, and then you just look at what's the opposite of this. And sometimes people just guess at the transformation. They guess at what the benefits are. And again, when we guess at the problems, we may not even be guessing at what they actually want. And here's a perfect example. I remember one time a student of a friend asked people what they wanted, and they said they wanted to be more authentic in their content. So that's what they did, a whole launch on how to be authentic in content, and it bombed. But then they realized, okay, they talked to everyone, and they realized, oh, people just want to be authentic so they can make more sales and attract the right people that are like them. So they redid the launch around how to be like you and make more sales. Boom, it took off. So if we would have diagnosed the problem in the first place and realized, okay, when people aren't authentic, what's happening? Well, they have disconnection from their audience. They're attracting people that don't like, they're not making sales. It's like, great, we now know the problem. Let's do the opposite of the problem. So no connection. I'm not making sales. I'm putting out good information. So now we can craft a really good title because we got to the problem first, and then we did the opposite of the problem for the benefit and the transformation. Now the problem is relevant to people because they're like, that's what I'm going through. And then when you talk about the opposite of the problem, they're like, that's exactly what I want. I don't want this problem. I want this thing over here. So we have to understand the problem first. And this is, this is going to help in your ads. It's going to help in your launches. It's going to help inside of content sales. It helps in all the areas. We have to understand the problems first. But then we also need to understand the problems so we can diagnose people. And when we diagnose people, we get them to self-identify, like, this is relevant to me. This ad is relevant to me. This webinar is relevant to me. This launch is relevant to me. This content is relevant to me. This is exactly what I'm dealing with. This is exactly what I'm going through, right? So it builds huge amounts of relevancy. It's how we diagnose people. So people have to literally think, oh my gosh, this is for me. This is about me. They're speaking about me. We're going to use problems in content titles. So if someone told me my problem is that I'm not making sales, even though I'm giving out great information, it's like, okay, cool. I can create a piece of content that says how to make more sales without giving out more education. Boom. Perfect how-to title. Even though I go against how-to content, just to, set the record straight, my stance is not against how-to content. It's about doing how-to content all the time. We still need it. We still want it. Right. But even then, it could be 5 ways to make more sales without teaching more information. 5 ways to make sales without giving out all your best stuff for free. It's like, those are great titles. Those go against the grain a little bit. You're going to get education. They're not boring how-tos, but they all stem from problems. So we can use problems to create content. We also want to figure out those problems and those titles that work really well based off of problems. Or even if it's a benefit-based title that came from a problem, that's fine too. But we just, like, if you want to launch or do a webinar, just look at what your best content was. What was converting the best? What was doing the best? And then try that as a webinar. Try that as a little launch, or try it as an evergreen process. And again, that's how we find our webinar titles. That's how we find our webinar topics, our funnels, all of that stuff. Obviously, understanding the problems is going to help with sales because you're building more rapport. You're demonstrating you understand them. It also builds trust in your ability to solve the problem. When you very accurately and specifically describe someone's problem, why it's there, raise their awareness to what they're doing to try to fix it that doesn't work, all of that stuff, that builds relevancy. It builds self-diagnosing content. So we want to do all of it. Okay. So that's problems. Problems was element number 1. Again, we use it all over the place. We're going to use it in ads, funnels. I use problems everywhere. Even when you look at my stuff and you be like, well, Brandon's not using a problem there and he's not using a problem there. I probably am. When you hear me talk about a benefit, I only came to the conclusion that that's a benefit because I understood the problem. Because I understood this is what they truly want, because this is what they're dealing with, and this is the opposite of that. So then the next element, and it's actually 3 of them, but I'm going to combine them into one. We talk about identities, values, and beliefs. And these are really important. When we understand the beliefs that our audience has, we can use it to form connection. But if we can identify beliefs they have that are causing the problems in their life, this makes for really good thought reversal content. So when we start to uncover the beliefs that they have inside of their life that are causing a problem, you get to shift the perspective. Then you have an opportunity to add the most amount of value in their life that anyone has. because you're making them aware of this is what the cause of the problem is. And sometimes just stopping that cause will alleviate the problem, will stop the problem. Okay. So we have really good thought reversal content from that. But there's two things that are even more important when it comes to identities, values, and beliefs. They actually help us build subconscious rapport, attraction, and triggers. And I mean triggers in a good way, meaning that if I have a piece of content and it's titled How to Create Engaging Content, and then I have another one titled How Course Creators Can Create Engaging Content, just by putting the identity course creators in there, I have more relevancy. It's a subconscious trigger because it's going to stop the scroll because it feels like, okay, they're talking about me. This is relevant to me. So it's a trigger in that sense. It's a trigger in that it gets them to, oh, that's relevant. Oh, that's stopped. And it's, again, that's an automatic thing that's happening for them. It's like, boom, boom, boom. Oh, that's me. They're talking about me. So we have that. But then also when we start to use identities, values, and beliefs, we start to build rapport with them. They start to connect with us. It's just like your best friend. You probably connected with them automatically. Why? Willing to bet you have shared identities, values, and beliefs. So we need to use that with our audience. And that leads to the third reason why we need it, which is connection. So I intentionally will create connection-based content that shows who I am, my values, my beliefs, things like I like coffee, love espresso, love making espressos and lattes. I have like this, I'm a little embarrassed to say how much money I've spent on my coffee machine. Actually, it's really not that bad. It's probably $2,000 or $3,000 on our grinder, between our grinder and our espresso machine and my pour over machine. And actually it's probably closer to $3,000 or $4,000 now I think about it. But that's what I love. I value that. So people can connect with it. Whether, sometimes I get other coffee lovers that are like admiring the setup or what machine do you have and this, that. And I talk about my kids and my beliefs on entrepreneurship. And this has nothing to do with messaging, but has everything to do with connection. And I've seen people like my friend, Catherine Zinkina, build amazing brands using a lot of connection content. She shares a lot about her life and her values and her beliefs and what she's doing and this and that. It forms a lot of connection. She also educates, a lot through her content as well. But that's why we need identities, values, and beliefs, because these allow us to build connection, especially with story inside of episode, like podcasts or sales mechanisms and all that stuff. So we also need to know the next element is mistakes. And there's two types of mistakes. There's the mistake that caused the problem. And then there's the mistake they do to try to fix it. That doesn't work. Some businesses don't need to focus on the cause because it's too traumatic and it's not going to benefit you to talk about the cause. But most businesses will, because it demonstrates relevancy. It also demonstrates an understanding of their situation, why the situation, and it just makes them feel like you're inside their head. You get them to self-identify that this person is for me. I need to pay attention. But the reason why I like talking about the mistakes to fix the problem is because when you use that in your messaging, it attracts people that recognize they have a problem and are already trying to fix it on their own, which means that it is a pretty severe problem, big enough problem for them to invest their time and money and energy. But there's also going to be the best buyers, like the people that are most likely to buy, the ones who are recognizing I have a problem and trying to fix it on their own already. So we're going to use mistakes. I like to combine them with the problems. But again, if you guys remember, we use it in content. Sometimes I will have content that is just self-identifying content. It's just like, hey, if you have this problem, you're like making these mistakes and you probably tried this and it didn't work. People are like, oh my God, yes, that's me. It's like I'm building huge amounts of relevancy. I'm building trust in my ability to solve their problem. I use that in webinars. I use it in launches. I use it all over the place. Sales. It also helps me build huge amounts of relevancy because when you can say, here's the problem and here's the cause and they're doing the cause and here's what people try to do to fix it. You hit all three. It's like, it's game over. The amount of relevancy and just subconscious rapport you built is absolutely massive. But a lot of people don't do that. A lot of people just get up on webinars or content and they just teach. It's like, no, build some rapport, like demonstrate you understand what's going on, make them feel like this is totally for you. So again, I use it in webinars, I use it in launches, and I'll be honest with you guys, our best performing ads have huge amounts of relevancy and almost always talk about the mistakes. They either talk about mistakes, problems, or both. Those are usually the best performing ads. And again, we've spent millions of dollars on ads, all profitably. And that's one of the reasons why we're able to do it, because people go like, oh my God, that's me. That's my situation. They're talking about me. They're talking about my situation. Okay. Now, the next elements that we talked about are actually more content focused. So we did talk about content, but we can use these content topics inside of everything. So the 4 areas of content I recommend you focus on are thought reversals, education, connection, and self-identifying. But I always love, and here's the thing, is I think we need all 4 in order for our sales to be maximized. If you want the most amount of sales you can possibly make, you need to be incorporating all 4 of these. When we look at it through the lens of content, you can't shove all 4 into a single piece of content unless it's like a podcast episode or a long YouTube video or something like that. So what you want is you want content in all 4 of these areas. So you want thought reversal specific content because it's going to shift perspective. You're going to want educational content because it gives you that authority. You're going to want, and you have to do educational content the right way. So you're not just encyclopedia, encyclopedia-ing it. You want to TED Talk it, you want more engaging, more rapport being built. You want to use the problems, mistakes. You want relevancy. You want all that stuff. We also need connection content. And then we want self-identifying content. Now I'm using all 4 of these elements in this podcast episode because I have enough time to do it. But what you have to realize is sometimes people have to sit in your brand long enough to experience all of these things. Sometimes people need to be in your brand and sit there and they might experience a thought reversal one day. They might need to, then the next day see a connection piece of content, and the next day a self-identifying piece of content. And that might take a week or 2 for them to experience all of that stuff. So sometimes people need to sit inside the brand to experience all those things. And I think a lot of people sit there and they go well, Brandon, I did this one video and it didn't work. And it's like, what do you mean? I'm like, what do you mean it didn't work? It didn't bring sales. And it's like, well, content's not supposed to drive sales. It's supposed to gain something you need in order to get a sale. And then you bring them to a sales funnel or process. And that's where the sale happens. And oh, okay. But you can use all 4 of these pieces of content or concepts in your sales process. You can use them in webinars and video series and challenges and live launches and all of that stuff. And to be honest with you, you should if you want to maximize the amount of leads and sales that you're going to be using. So for me, we look at these 4 elements, thought reversals, education, connection, self-identifying, as individual pieces of content, but I also look at them as elements I need to make a really kick-ass webinar or funnel or something. So to give you an example, I'm going to come up with a really cool title for my webinar based off of my content, which comes from these 4. Right. So I'm going to use these for my content. Which one's performing the best? I craft a title off of that, either a benefit based or a problem based title. I do it. Right. And the first thing that I like to do is I like to just hook people in. And then I go through a diagnosis stage. I go through the problems and the mistakes and get them to go oh my God, this is for me, so relevant to me. And then I go through hey, a lot of the reasons why this is happening is because, you're likely doing this and this. And then I shift their perspective. I'm that's not really the right way to be doing it. And I use my counter examples, my metaphors, and I do all of that stuff. And then I'll present the solution. So I'm here's what the answer actually is. And that leads to teaching. So just to kind of recap, when I do the diagnosis stage, the problems and the mistakes, I'm getting them to self-identify. So bam, self-identifying right in the beginning. Then I present the solution or what doesn't work, and I shift their perspective on what's not working, even though they think it is the right thing to do. Bam, thought reversal. Then I go right into the teaching and I'm here's the solution. And I give a counterexample of the solution or proof of the solution that it works. And now get them really excited. And then I teach the solution and I use the persuasive tutorial. But part of that is backing it up. Part of it is backing up the teachings. And I like to use story to do that. So now when I talk about story, I'm able to use my connection elements and my identities and my beliefs and my values. And now I'm building connection. So you'll notice, and in that training that we have coming up, our 3-day training, you guys are going to see all of this in action. You're going to go oh, that's a self-identifying piece. That's he's teaching, but he's not really giving us a ton of information to overwhelm us. He's using a thought reversal and shifting our perspective. He's using connect. You're going to recognize all that. And the thing is even when I'm doing it, even when I'm saying it, even when I'm using it and you recognize it, you'll even see the power in it, because you're still going to be like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. Or I really like that. Or I'm learning that I never realized that before. Or, oh my gosh, I really want to work with him. So with that being said, that's how I use all of these different elements throughout the brand. And so, like I said, we've went through and dove into each one of these more specifically in the past episodes. But if you want to learn how to start putting this all together, you want to learn like, okay, Brandon, I get the concepts. I understand this is kind of like mind blowing, whatever. And you want to learn more on how to do this inside of your brand, come to the 3-day training. It's brandonlucero.com/MYPM. And we're going to spend 3 days going through it. At the end of the 3 days, we will be opening up New Generation Mastery and NGM Plus. We only open up New Generation Mastery once a year. We used to do it twice a year. We stopped back in 2022. 2022 was the last year we did it. We only opened it up twice in 2022. We opened it up once in 2023. We're only planning on opening it up once in 2024. And so that's coming up as well. The one time a year where we do open up enrollment to NGM, like we literally haven't had anyone enter into the program in the past year. And so we're reopening it up for anyone who wants to join. But again, at least come to the 3 days, brandonlucero.com/MYPM. And we're going to start piecing a lot of this stuff together. If you guys get onto the list early enough and you get into the Facebook group, we're actually going to have some bonus training on there on how to create content to get DMs and things like that. So if as long as you get inside the group before March 18th, you should be able to access that information too. So if you guys have any questions, let us know. And like always, please leave me some reviews on iTunes. I love reading those reviews. I want to see them come in from all the listeners. If you guys gotten any value from this podcast, head over, leave a review, and I will see you guys either on the 3-day training or next week's episode. Take care, everyone.
Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, go below, hit the subscribe button, and make sure you click on that bell icon and get notified every time we drop a new episode. Now, if you're looking for the show notes, we have them linked underneath this video, as well as our social media handles and some links to free training and offers that we drop from time to time to help you guys even further. So go check those out if you're interested, and thank you so much for tuning in to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast.